This is My Taste is Better Than Yours, the manga podcast where Guardian Enzo and I, Samu, discuss some of our favourite series and figure out, is my taste better than yours? Hello again, everyone. We're back to discuss Hunter x Hunter. This is our third video discussing the series. We're splitting up by arc. This time, we're talking about Yorknew City. Now, I have a tangent question, Enzo. How do you feel about New York City? Have you ever lived there? Do you have any strong feelings about that city in particular?
Oh, okay. Well, I've never lived there. I've visited there twice. Interestingly, actually, the second time I was there, uh, I was in a hotel. I've only been to New York twice in my life, and the second time I was there, I went there on a business trip for like 2, 3 days at a coffee convention, actually. And I was staying in Chelsea. Now, I'd never been to Chelsea. Chelsea, by the way, it's a neighborhood in London, but it's also a neighborhood in New York. And I was in a hotel in Chelsea. My boss recommended a hotel there, so that's where I was staying. And that was the night of the Chelsea bombing. There was a terrorist bombing in Chelsea, and in fact, I took an overnight flight, a red eye, from San Diego to New York. Didn't get much sleep. Kind of went out and had a busy day in New York, going on adrenaline. And by about 7, 8 o'clock in the evening, I was kind of wiped out. So I passed out in my hotel room pretty early, and something woke me up. And I remember hearing like the echoes of like some big banging sound. And I was like, oh, that was weird. And I went back to sleep. And when I woke up, I had like 305 messages on my phone. Um, because my boss knew what hotel I was staying at because she recommended it, and so um, and Chelsea was in the name of the hotel too. So yeah, so that was a wild thing. Broader question: how I feel about New York City? I like it. It's exciting. It reminds me of London in a way, in that they're both cities that I find to be exhilarating and really exciting. And there's kind of like a buzz in the air the whole time you're there, and they're too expensive for any mortal human to live. And that's kind
Mm.
of how I feel about New York. I have kind of fantasy elements. Like occasionally I'll think, boy, if I was really, really loaded, wouldn't it be fun to live on the Upper West Side? But reality, the cities I think I would want to live, no, probably not New York. Although I do enjoy visiting it, it's a lot of fun, and in many ways reminiscent of London for me.
Okay. New York, Yorknew, this is the namesake. This is Togashi's twist on that city. I don't know if you know as well, but the entire map of Hunter x Hunter, Togashi is essentially just rejigged and shuffled and changed around all the real world countries.
Yep.
We got Yorknew here, his version of New York, I feel, and I genuinely didn't know that story you were going to tell, but how apt is it that this is also an arc in which there are bombings happening in this alternate
Yeah,
version of
that's
New York
true. Yeah,
City?
yeah, that's true.
So you could say you were there in Yorknew when this was happening in this very arc as well.
Indeed.
Um, it's the third arc of the well, third, fourth, technically fourth if you include Soldic family, and this is Kurapika's arc primarily. It's about his involvement in the mafia as he's aiming to retrieve the stolen Scarlet Eyes from his clan that are being held, and there's an auction happening, and this introduces the Phantom Troupe, who are the target of his vengeance. These are the killers of his clan who took the eyes of his family and friends. And pretty much the entire arc takes place in Yorknew City, when this conflict between those two comes to a head. Gon and Killua also, and Diorno, he's there to a much minor degree. Gon and Killua are there searching for Gon's father through this Greed Island game, a name which becomes much more relevant in the next arc. And this is also being held up for auction in Yorknew City around the same time. So this is all the characters together for the very last time, I believe, actually. I think this is the last arc of the series in which we have scenes where all four of them are together, which is kind of wild to think about, considering this was published between 1999 and like 2001. Let's go from there. Yorknew City. I feel like, especially before Chimera Ant was adapted in the 2011 version of the anime, this might have actually been the favorite arc of most fans. I feel like post anime adaptation of Chimera Ant, I feel like it's probably shifted more in that direction, in brackets as it should, because that is the better arc in my opinion. But I still also think this is a very, very popular arc with fans. I was going to ask you what your take on that is, why you think it is so popular, but also thinking on it myself. I reread this for this discussion. I hadn't read it in I think well over 10 years. I'd watched the anime adaptation, obviously. I think I got a lot more enjoyment out of it this time. I think I kind of undersold this arc to its importance and its impact. And if anything, it was actually one of my least favorites in the entire series for the longest time. So I'm glad that I did reread it for this discussion. But why do you think it's so popular, Enzo? And what's your like very broad feelings on the arc as it stands in the grand scheme of Hunter x Hunter?
Well, it is. It is, in fact, the last time that the big four are ever together, and I find that kind of sad actually, because I think they're terrific as a foursome. And I am sad that Togashi didn't exploit that dynamic after this. Um, I would agree with you that it was probably the most popular arc before the 2011 anime got to Chimera Ant, and of course until Togashi finally finished Chimera Ant in the manga. It took a long time, obviously. I do agree Chimera Ant is the better arc. I would rank it as overall the best arc in the series and maybe the best arc in Shonen. But there's no major arc in Hunter x Hunter. I don't think is great. I even love the little mini arcs like Whale Island, which is really the sort of at the start of this, which we'll probably touch on briefly. But I think Yorknew is really a fascinating arc. I rank it kind of in the middle of the pack as far as Hunter is concerned, but that's still pretty damn high overall. I think it's partly popular because the fans love Kurapika, and Kurapika is an extraordinarily popular character. And I think that has a lot to do with it. I think it's also popular because the Phantom Troupe would go on to become an extremely popular subset of Hunter x Hunter, and with good reason. Um, and obviously, this series has a huge role for the troupe. And I also just generally think Kurapika's kind of emo backstory is a thing a lot of fans really like. And in a sense, the whole Yorknew arc, it's tied into the Great Island arc actually, which so there's that element too. It definitely plays into what's going to come. It's important in that sense. But I also think that the arc is basically driven by Kurapika and his quest for justice. Some would say justice, some would say revenge. Your mileage may vary, but I think that really drives the whole arc. And I think a lot of Hunter fans really get into that side of the story. I think it's super popular, and which is why they made one of the big screen films largely about that very theme. So they don't do that by accident. So I do think it is very popular, and I think justifiably because it's great, and they're all great. To me, like I said, it's probably somewhere in the middle, but somewhere in the middle is still pretty freaking high for me. So no complaints.
I think as well it comes down to the shift in tone. This feels like the arc when things get even more serious than what they were before. And I think this carries
Absolutely.
on pretty much through the rest of the series. It ebbs and flows slightly, but I think this is maybe where Hunter x Hunter, as people think of it now and love it, this is the Hunter x Hunter that they think of maybe. Maybe that's just the association of what came before it was kind of set up for this moment.
I do think this arc is kind of in a way where Togashi really kind of transcends shonen and says, "Okay,
Mm.
I don't need this demographic thing. I have a belief that this series has tended to alternate between shonen arcs and seinen arcs, actually, and
Well,
I think this is the arc where he really embraced his inner seinen mangaka, and at the very least, he took it places that shonen doesn't normally go.
Well, okay, that leads on to a good point. We're, I think we're going to agree largely. We're just going to get into everything with this arc. Since we like to disagree on things,
Who doesn't?
I let's have a little argument. Okay.
Okay.
Um, can you? Why don't you like go into this idea of like this? Do you have anything more to say on this, like Seinen, Shonen, changing in
Well,
arcs and approach, and like why
yeah,
do you view it in that way?
I think first of all, I think that Togashi does it because he's a freaking genius, and he has to keep his own interest level at maximum in order to continue to function at the highest level as an artist. So I think it would be boring for him to kind of stay within the same stylistic track. I think he needs to shift from track to track. I think if you look, Heaven's Arena, that's he's getting established in the series. It's definitely, excuse me, Hunter Exam is very much shonen. Um, then we get into, we do the little short arc with the Zoldyck family, which has maybe some more seinen elements, kind of teasers. Heaven's Arena, hardcore shonen arc. Yorknew, very seinen arc, very seinen, complex, dark, more about the mind games than the battles. Then we go into Greed Island, which is again a super shonen arc, big time shonen arc. Then we go into Chimera Ant, which is to me is almost almost textbook seinen arc, much more so than shonen. Then the election arc, we kind of get, it's not a long arc, but it kind of gets back into a more shonen-y vibe. Then we get into a Dark Continent, which is very much of a seinen arc in my opinion. And I think, Hunter Exam, Gon centric, Killua centric, um, Zoldyck family kind of in its own category. Heaven's Arena, Gon, Killua, especially Gon. Yorknew, Kurapika arc, Greed Island, Gon arc, Chimera Ant introduces whole avenues, whole tracks that don't even connect to the main cast, and that's a whole other thing. Then we get into election is so again, Gon is there. So yeah, so I think it partly ties into who the main focus character is. I also have the opinion that the arcs of Hunter x Hunter. I talked about this when we did Heaven's Arena, but the arcs of Hunter x Hunter reflect the personality of the main focus character, and Kurapika's motivations are very seinen in nature, and Yorknew temperamentally is it has a big role for Gon and Killua and Leoria too, but it's definitely Kurapika's arc. It's his it's his worldview, it's his personality that dominates the feel, the vibe of this arc in a very, very, very direct and very profound way, in my opinion.
Okay. Yeah, I wanted to hear that because I think I just fundamentally disagree with you on everything you said. And
Well, you're
I can,
entitled.
yeah, I'll give you my take. So I think when you say it switches between shonen and seinen, I view it differently. Okay, let me use an analogy. Okay, if we're talking fruits and vegetables, by the botanical definition, a fruit is something that comes from the flower of a plant. A vegetable is something that is from the plant itself. And don't worry, I'm getting somewhere with this. I promise. We have an idea of what a fruit is. You know, we think fruits are typically sweet. Some of them aren't, limes or lemons, or some of them are even mistaken for vegetables, like cucumbers or peppers or like even olives. They're technically fruits by botanical definition. Something doesn't have to be sweet or savory to define it as fruit or vegetable, even if we do often do that by mistake. And I think the botanical definition doesn't change whatsoever. In the same way that I feel like the label of shonen and seinen doesn't change. Hunter x Hunter is marketed primarily towards young boys. It's shonen, it's in Weekly Shonen Jump. Seinen, obviously, older teenage boys, adult men. I think the fact of something shonenness or senenness is actually irrelevant in terms of a definition if you want to go into like the tone or content. Like sure, there are expectations in terms of tropes that you could get out of any given demographic or even approach to artwork or paneling. We have in our mind what we envision a shoujo series looks like compared to a seinen series or a shonen series. Like in some ways we have those expectations. I think personally, Hunter x Hunter never becomes a seinen series. I think it's always tackling shonen tropes, and it's more about embracing them. Togashi like taking hold of an idea, trope, concept for from an arc, and then subverting it in the ways that he feels he can, utilizing that within the story without. And I don't think necessarily that makes it seinen. I think he takes all these structures and he plays around with it, changes the principal character, which changes the mindset. And I just don't necessarily think that associating tone or content is 100% accurate in terms of splitting up between shonen and seinen. Like, if you say like if you associate more of the mind games with seinen like being dark and shonen with like battles and things like that, Hunter x Hunter has all those things, but I think there are series within every demographic which have different shades that they fall under. So yeah, to me, Hunter x Hunter is just it's as shonen as it gets, in my opinion. I think in every arc, even Chimera Ant arc, I think that is a re-examination of the idea of what it means for the main character to retain power and the cost that comes from that, and then flipping that with the villain. And again, that we could have a lengthy discussion on that when we get to there. But yeah, just interest.
And
I
we
feel like we just
will.
have a disagreement on because I noticed you said that before, so I just wanted to
Yeah,
touch on
that's
that.
and I think mostly we're arguing about semantics here, to be honest with you. But I would say that as a broad statement, I do think you're mostly wrong. But I also think that as a broad statement, demographic labels are not really all that rigid anyway, and people pay too much attention to them more than they should. And I think you look at a series like Orange, which started out, I think it started out as a shojo, and then it ended up in a Seinen magazine. So it's literally the demographic change. I don't remember which direction it changed, but I know it changed from one to the other. And the content of the series didn't change at all. It simply changed in where it was published. And so I do think we can get too hung up in the dynamics of this demographic, that demographic. In the final analysis, it comes down to interpretation. And I understand what you're saying. I don't necessarily agree with it. I'll finally say though, as if you look at in Japan at least the audience for Hunter x Hunter and what it skews, I think this has always been true, but I know it's true now that the audience for Hunter x Hunter skews adult far more than say something like Bleach or Naruto does. And I think that's probably always been true because I think that I don't think I think there's a finite number of 14-year-old boys who are that interested in kind of the subversion of tropes and things that Togashi really wants to explore. There are some, but I think mostly that appeals to a somewhat older audience than the typical shonen battle series might. I mean, I think if you a typical Dragon Ball audience is not going to skew the same age wise as a typical Hunter x Hunter audience would, and I just think so. But in the end, though, I think we could argue about this all day. I think it's mostly semantics, to be honest with you. Where I think we're mostly agreeing actually, and we're arguing about definitions. But anyway, it's an
Well,
interesting point. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I just think I put in the same way you don't put as much focus on the demographic. I think I don't put as much focus on the content. To me, if it's published in Weekly Shonen Jump, it's shonen, like point
Yeah.
blank period. In the same way that like those seinen series, cute girl doing cute things, those are seinen series. That those appeal to adult men, but the content is nothing like you would you may if you apply that same rule. I don't necessarily think maturity or darkness within a series removes it from being shonen.
Oh, I don't
But
either,
yeah,
for the record. But
so let's discuss then this shonen arc,
Mhm.
Yorknew City. I think Enzo, did you have anything to say on the like little prelude section? We have the mansion part with Kurapika, but then Whale
Right.
Island with Gon and Killua.
Only that I love Whale Island in because I love seeing. I just personally love seeing Gon and Killua get an opportunity to just act like kids. without anyone threatening them and without any and they're doing other things, like they're thinking ahead and they're thinking about Gon is already thinking about Greed Island and finding his dad and all this other stuff. But Gon, when he's around Aunt Mito, is a totally different person than he is in any other context we see him in the series. And when he's on Whale Island, he's kind of a different person than he is when we see him in any other place in the series. And I enjoy that. Even though his name now officially might be Gon Freaks with an E at the end of it, he's still at least nominally the protagonist of the series. And I like seeing him removed from his usual self and put in a completely different situation, behaving differently. And I think it's a good reminder that context is important in defining how people are and how they behave, how they act. I also just think, I think it's really wonderful seeing this bond that he has with Mito. I think it's really great. I love it. And I also think that he and Killua are just so freaking cute, when they're just acting their own age and just being kids. And I think we lose sight of the fact sometimes with the stuff that's going on. We lose sight of it because Togashi wants us to lose sight of it. That until he reminds us in a way that's bracing and shocking, hey, these are 13-year-olds. These are little kids. And when we see them in this environment, even if it's only for a few chapters, we really see them kind of in a sense in their natural habitat. More so for Gon than Killua, but it's also wonderful to see Killua. This is maybe the first time in Killua's life he's ever seen a non-dysfunctional family environment. When he watches when he watches Gon and Mito and Grandma and operating in a healthy, loving, normal, friendly way, you get the sense that this is like the first time Killua has ever seen this. And the impact that it has on Killua psychologically to see this, I think, is really very touching, actually. So even though it's very short, Togashi is able to do many profound and interesting things, even with only a few chapters. And I don't think it's a throwaway by any means. I think it's unique in the entire Hunter x Hunter catalog, and it's something that really should be valued for the place it holds, because it does some really, really interesting things.
It's also noteworthy that Greed Island is brought up as early as these first few chapters of the arc, and this carries throughout the arc, setting up, preparing us for what is going to come next. So yeah, even from that point, it's already establishing something which is going to be super, super relevant a few years later once those chapters are published. And I agree, there is that sense of, especially knowing how we know it's going to play out, how their relationship is going to adapt, like clinging on to those moments of joy and like sweetness that they have with each other. Well, we get them. We get them here. We do get it scattered throughout this arc as well when they're caught in the hijinks of everything else. And then we get a good bunch in Greed Island. But yeah, Gon and Killua stuff is always it's like that feels like, even though he's not done it in so long, that is like Togashi's go-to, which I feel like he probably doesn't even have to think hard about how he's going to do it. It just comes across so naturally. I did mention, so Gon and Killua are scattered in this arc. They get caught up in Kurapika's story, kind of as this B plot, while they're trying to get Greed Island and get involved in this auction and earning money for themselves. But if we shift over to the main story then that's being covered here, let's talk about the Phantom Troupe. So, Phantom Troupe are alluded to before this point, and they're introduced. It's very classic shonen trope of organization, villain, bad guys. Yeah, I think this was one, again, I'm trying to re-examine it, knowing what I know from later arcs, because for the most recent published chapters, we got a lot of Phantom Troupe stuff, which I think is still fresh in my mind and shaped my opinion as I was rereading their introductions. Because I don't think they resonated too strongly with me personally the first time around that I was introduced to them. They feel like such individual characters, and there's maybe not a visual cohesion to them in the same way that some other groups, organizations in shonen lean more into, and I think generally are more successful. But then again, I don't think Phantom Troupe, the intent is to make them seem it's a complicated one because they are the spider. They're all part of one being, one group, but also they are just so individual in their personalities and approaches and opinions. I think I got to appreciate them a lot more this time around. Yeah, well, what do you think of Phantom Troupe? I feel like there's a lot we could discuss just on them alone, but yeah,
Yeah,
what are your thoughts?
absolutely. I didn't reread, to be honest with you. I didn't reread it or rewatch it this time because I just didn't have time. Although, I have multiple exposures to the arc, so I feel like I remember it pretty well. I think the Phantom Troop, I agree with you that what we get in the Succession arc definitely changes how we think about the Phantom Troop in a big way, and that extends to their interactions in Yorknew. Um, so yeah, for sure. I think from the beginning, Togashi uh, is trying to paint them as not so much as you say a cohesive group, but a group of very individualistic people who are held together kind of by the raw power and charisma of Chrollo, who's at the center of the group. And maybe their reasons for that don't become clear until much later in the story, but it's clear that that dynamic exists, even if we don't know why it exists. And I think the fact that they are so individualistic and yet still have a certain loyalty to each other. In fact, Chrollo really that loyalty is like a religion to him. It's like that's the Hippocratic oath of the spiders, and so it's a very interesting dynamic. I to me when I was first experiencing this, which was through the 2011 anime, uh, certain members of the troop made a stronger impression on me than others did. And I found it interesting how much I, in my mind at least, was grading them out on a moral spectrum from kind of like best to worst as I was watching them interact with each other and with the others characters, especially with the boys. And I'm curious whether Togashi intended that or not. And I'm not to this day absolutely sure whether he did or not. But I do think it's an interesting question of are they all kind of in the same bucket, or are there major differences kind of in the moral outlook of the members of the Phantom Troop? So yeah, I mean, they're from the very beginning. They're very arresting and commanding presences. They're clearly these guys are not. This is not just another random criminal organization like the other criminal organization in this arc. These guys are. There's something completely different about them right from the beginning, and it's inescapable that exists.
Should mention, I mean, bears worth repeating, like we said in the previous episodes, that we will intermingle spoilers with the whole discussion. We're going to assume you are familiar with the series at this point. It's kind of hard to separate what we know in retrospect when talking about these characters as well. But yeah, I think if I was to put myself in that mindset of experiencing it for the first time, you just have to consider how little we actually know, considering how little we still actually know even now. I mean, we got that flashback very recently, which explained a lot from that very specific early time. But we don't know we don't know their perspective really on what happens with Kurapika's clan. We don't know the full details of that. I feel like Chrollo himself is still such an enigmatic character. There's this like mystery that's like constantly around him. I feel like even now there's so much more still to explore that we're going to get hopefully in these upcoming chapters coming out. Um, so yeah, I think Yorknew does a good job at least of introducing them and understand, or at least giving this impression of why Chrollo is able to command them or like push these seemingly slightly different people together as a troop. Yeah. I think another thing that I really like about this arc on rereading it was Tagashi's ability, especially when the plot with Kurapika and Gon and Killua and the troop was happening, is, and he does this in the succession contest as well, where we know what's going to happen. We know what's happened, but the characters don't. But the characters make theories and plans based on this incorrect information. So the story isn't actually just delivering like plot point ABC moving the plot in a linear direction as you would expect. You have characters figuring out the logic of a situation or working on wrong assumptions, which could just so easily be annoying because you want to tell the characters, oh, come on, you're just wasting time. I know what's happening. Get to the point. But seeing how Togashi manages to like use the absence of information with characters to increase the dramatic tension, I think is just another
Yeah,
note on
and
his
dramatic
talents.
tension is the word for it too, because the tension and some of the stuff that happens in this arc is incredible.
Mm,
And it is really fascinating because a lot of times Gon and Killua and Kurapika are operating without knowing what the other knows, without knowing what the other's doing, and they, as you said, they have to try to act based on what they think is going on and what they think the other wants them to do, but they don't know. And they don't know, is am I helping or am I hurting? Am I doing the right thing? Am I doing the wrong thing? And I think you see some instances in this arc, I would also say, where Gon and Killua's inexperience in the world, especially Gon, they kind of make some questionable decisions because they make assumptions that are wrong, and they make Kurapika's life harder in a way sometimes by doing what they do because they make a wrong assumption about what he wants, what he thinks they should do, what he may be doing himself. But as you say, Togashi knows very well how frustrated the audience will be by that, and he uses that to great effect. It's 1,000% intentional on his part.
And like for how it affects Kurapika is obvious as well because if there was no Gon and Killua there to complicate the situation, then Kurapika would have made different decisions that would have taken his character down a whole different route, which probably was his intention of going out on this revenge mission, seek of justice. But he has to.
However,
I was going to say he has to rethink it to accommodate for these new friends that he has, who he's acknowledging as friends
yes,
that he doesn't want to see them get hurt.
yes, I think that you're right, but I think that those things that Gon and Killua did that stopped Kurapika from going on maybe the route he was planning to go, in a sense, they saved him from a path that only had one potential end, and it wasn't a good one. In a sense, there, so even Killua, for all of his situation, I think Gon and Killua have an innocence to them that has a positive effect on Kurapika. In fact, one could argue that it's their innocence that saves him from himself, even if you want to get poetical about it.
Yeah, no, I think that's true, 100%. Relating to that, let me tick off my point I like to mention every arc, the anticlimax test. I think this is achieved in two ways for Yorknew City. Um, for one, I mean, no, you have Kurapika's revenge storyline. That's kind of what is being built up as the driving force that we're seeing here, and that comes to a head the most midway through the arc when he's fighting Uvogin, and that's a great fight. That I think as you're reading it or watching it, that seems to be like, oh, this is step one in the plan that's now going to unfold. Kurapika's going to do this to all of them. But really, the conflict, the battles, in the traditional sense that you expect, kind of end at that point. We do have this back and forth dramatic moment where Leorio is also caught in it as well, and both sides are like, as I say, don't have the full information to like get what they want out of the other, and doesn't end, I think, in an epic showdown that you maybe want. Even when you see things like Chrollo getting kidnapped and taken by Kurapika, there's not that the revenge that we expect doesn't happen. Um, Things just play out slightly differently in a very Togashi way. And the other point, I think it's actually the very, very end of the arc because Yorknew does bleed very seamlessly into Greed Island when it comes to the auctions that take place there. Those are technically, I think, Greed Island arc content, but this arc ends with Hisoka betraying Phantom Troupe and then Chrollo being taken out to the city, everything that's happening with Pakunoda, which I think for me hit more and reading it again this time, especially since I think you would agree she seems like one of the more morally good characters, and it is quite interesting. It's curious that she still is influenced by Chrollo, considering how different they seem as people. But you see how far she's willing to go to keep him alive, to keep the troop going. And then Chrollo is going to be banished. That is all going to happen. But then what happens? Hisoka has also been building up this face-off that he's basically wanted with Chrollo. That was his whole intention in joining the Phantom Troupe and like worming himself in there to get to the strongest person he can. And then Chrollo is banished because he no longer has his powers. And we have that iconic reaction from Hisoka. Where it's
Yes,
like,
I remember it well.
so that was all for nothing. So again, we have two showdowns involving Chrollo, which never happened. And at this point in the story, he actually just disappears for the longest time. Actually, I wonder. I know Gon hasn't been in the series for a long time. Neither has Killua. But I wonder if you measured it in years in our time, maybe the time between Chrollo disappearing here and reappearing in succession contests is maybe the longest for any of those like major recurring characters. So yeah, definitely an anticlimax. It kind of ends abruptly, but also aligns with, I think, Kurapika having to shift his mindset on revenge as a whole.
Yeah, it definitely passes your anticlimax test. There's no question about that. And I think that um, I do agree that, like for example, Pakunoda and Nobunaga, I find are the two most morally ambiguous characters in the troupe. I think those are the two who we look at them and the decisions they make and the things they do. For me, at least, as someone who isn't, who isn't a supervillain or a sociopath, those are the two people whose motivations I find the most relatable. I find myself thinking, yeah, I totally get that. I totally get that. And almost to the point where you start to think, why are they even in this group? Because they don't seem like they fit with the rest of them. But then you realize, like you said, Pakunoda is literally willing to lay down her own life in order to protect Chrollo. And maybe we get a better idea of that much later in the story, but that we certainly don't know much about it here. Um, and I also think I want to get your input on this before we wrap this section. But Hisoka's role in this is really fascinating because he's wormed himself into the spiders, as you say. Sorry to mix my bug metaphors there, but he's done that in order to get that long desired fight with Chrollo. He thirsts for it. He hungers for it. And that anticlimactic moment with his reaction is indeed one of the greatest Togashi moments there is. But I find it fascinating. Once Hisoka realizes that Gon and Killua are involved, um, do you think, to what extent, if at all, do you think there is any extent to which Hisoka is literally trying to protect, especially Gon here, because he sees like he has a personal investment in Gon as someone who has the unripe fruit, as he referred to it in the first in the exam arc. But does he, or in the Heaven's Arena arc actually? Do you think he sees? He's like, in addition to wanting his fight, is he literally like doing his best to try to keep them from being taken out here? Because he has that investment in Gon's future that he wants to see what he develops into. And dare I say, maybe even because he has a certain affection for him, whether we want to chalk that up to something impure or not, maybe he genuinely likes Gon because he sees him as this really interesting, freaky, funny person. And for Hisoka, probably the greatest enemy in the world is boredom, and Gon is someone who alleviates his boredom. So whether he has any prurient interest in him or not, he wants to see him stick around because he entertains him, and ultimately that's what Hisoka wants, is to be entertained. I'm wondering if you just briefly would share your thoughts on Hisoka and his role here, especially as it relates to the boys.
I think clearly he's invested in Gon stocks, and he's not willing to see them disappear. I think my reading was probably he was caught in this dilemma and he had to fill every one of the troop in that moment. When it came to those predictions of the future and using his powers to get that done, he managed to do it in a way that benefited both him and Gon and Killua, primarily Gon, while also still furthering his agenda of getting to Chrollo. I mean, I do wonder if it came down to it, would he have chosen in the short term having the moment Chrollo over investing in Gon in the long term? I think maybe he would have probably stuck with Chrollo. But again, I think he would have tried to do what he did end up doing, which is he wants to have plans for all these outcomes and all these battles he wants to have with all these people. And when it comes to his affection for Gon, his feeling towards Gon, I don't know if I feel it so much in this arc. When we talk about Greed Island, I think that's one where we can definitely get into that more, and I'm going to be rereading that as well, preparing. So, yeah, I think I might have more thoughts on that when we get there.
Sounds good.
Cool. And then, like the previous arcs as well, I think we have a nice introduction of sidekicks, or these side characters who help our main characters, or at least join the group for a time. I think back to Hunter Exam, you have Tonpa. I don't think anyone is out here like grieving that Tonpa is not a recurring character. But you got him, and then you have like Zetsu and Wing in Heaven's Arena. I think here you have Melody, who I love. Melody's just one of the sweetest, nicest characters in the series. I'm so glad that she's recurring, and when she overlaps with Kurapika, I think she brings a side to him which ground him and just remind us that that Kurapika is this 17, 18-year-old kid who just so happened to have all these horrible things happen to him. Yeah, she just provides a sweetness to him, which is so nice. On the other side, we have Zepile, who helps Gon and Killua. Again, he's more of a Tompa character. He's there to like serve that addition to their dynamic. But yeah, I think of them all so far, Melody's my favorite. But I think the character that we get introduced to in Greed Island, who is the sidekick, who joins them, is also up there.
I want to say, yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Zepile because I really like Zepile. I think he is obviously he's a very much a supporting character. He plays literally a supporting role, but I do think he's great, and I love it. I also think he develops kind of an interesting. You see almost kind of a bro friendship between him and Leorio a little bit. I think you see elements of that where you don't see too much of Leorio interacting with people he's kind of on the same wavelength with. And I think to some extent there is a little bit of that here, which I kind of find fun. But yeah, Melanie, when Gon and Killua are not around to keep Kurapika's worst impulses in check, I think here's what I see, and I think we see more of this early, but I think even some of it here. I think Kurapika has this incredible pain that was inflicted on him with understandably so, that drives him. And I think that there are times, many times figuratively, but even sometimes literally, where you can almost see him like he looks at Gon and Killua being Gon and Killua, and he kind of just shakes his head and smiles. Sometimes he literally does it, and sometimes he's just doing it in his head, but you can see him doing it even when he's not literally doing it. And I think that they pull him back, in a very profound way, and make a better side of him reassert itself. And I think Melody does that too, and she does that in a way when Gon and Killua aren't around to do it, because she sees the same side of Kurapika that Leorio and Gon and Killua were privileged to see, that he doesn't generally show to people. And she doesn't want to see that side of him. She doesn't want to see that Kurapika die. She doesn't want to see him consumed by the other Kurapika. And I think that she is very important in that sense, because there aren't a lot of characters that do that. And Kurapika always needs someone to save him from himself. I kind of feel like that's the whole Kurapika vibe, is he always needs to have someone around to save him from himself. And she plays a very important role in doing that.
Especially when you consider, I mean, I don't want to make an incorrect statement here. I'm trying to think ahead. I don't believe after this point, at least in person, I don't think Kurapika interacts with Gon or Killua from here
No,
on out.
not once. Not once. You're not
So
incorrect.
I know there's phone calls between him and
Right.
then there's interactions with him and Leorio more. Um, but they're completely absent. So yeah, Melody really does take in that spot, which I think Leorio does sometimes as well. Those are maybe the replacements for grounding him in that way. So yeah, she's an important character. I love whenever she's involved in an arc. So seeing her in Succession Contest is a nice bonus as well. Nice. Anything else you want to cover? Or are you good for recommendation time?
No, I'm good for recommendations. Yep. Whenever you're ready.
Nice. Okay. I'm going to recommend. I'm bringing it back to this family tree, and once we've done this arc and this conversation, I'm going to have to expand further than the family tree. So I'm going to go with Kagurabachi, particularly the Rakuzaichi arc. This is another auction arc, so in that way it immediately fits the premise that we have here. That one in Kagurabachi is more about human trafficking, and we have a strong villain in the Sanazami clan, particularly the head Kura. I think Kagurabachi, what it does well in the arcs it's had so far is it has a very strong villains that contrast from the main character, and how that all comes to a head in these climactic finishes. And I think this arc, the Rakuzaichi arc, is when the series finds its groove. Maybe you could apply that similar to Yorknew, how fans really like Yorknew and see it as the beginning of Togashi entering more serious territory with the series. I think this is also in Kagurabachi. I'm thinking around the 40s, chapter 40-ish, where I think it elevates itself higher. And at this point, it's genuinely one of the ones in the magazine that I really enjoy. And like I say, it's either the grandchild or the distant descendant cousin of Hunter x Hunter in a lot of ways. So I think while that definitely doesn't look to subvert these tropes and concepts, I think there's still enough similarities there that that's why I'm recommending it. Enzo, you're probably tired of me bringing up Kagurabachi. Why don't you give your recommendation?
Well, I'm gonna have to take your word on it, because I gave up on Kagurabachi after 10 or 12 chapters. It just wasn't doing anything at all for me. So I'll take your word for it on that recommendation. Mine is Jormungand, by Takahashi Keitarou, and because this is a very Seinen-esque arc, I chose a. That's not the reason I chose a Seinen series as my recommendation, but the series this was not an easy rec for me. To find one that really had some of the same feel as York Shin, and in the end I did go with Jormungand, because I think it does have some of the same feel. It's a very interesting manga about a young boy who was taken from a war zone, orphan kid, a child soldier, winds up in the company of a weapons dealer and her group. This is a manga that rarer in those days. It got a full anime adaptation, and a pretty darn good one too, from White Fox. So you can enjoy it either way. But it has you have a. I would, in a sense, say that the main character here in Jormungand, well, there's really two main characters. The kid is Jonah, and then Coco is the main adult character who performs she's the head of the weapons group. Jonah is almost, in a way, reminds me of like a mix of Gon and Killua. He's like half and half of the two of them. And you have that same sense with him you often get in Hunter x Hunter, of these preternaturally gifted genius children in a situation where a child just should not be. And in Jormungand, in fact, that's often very much the point. But you have also a lot of moral ambiguity. there are a lot of characters in Jormungand who would not look out of place in not only in Yorknew, but maybe even in the Phantom Troupe, actually. Uh, and um, and yet, through all this gritty darkness and violence and moral ambiguity, there's also an underlying sense of fun to it in Jormungand, which you get with Yorknew as well. And so I do think they vibe pretty well, actually, and you get a lot of drama that's based on tension rather than battles. Drama driven from tension of really really smart people trying to outthink each other and do harm to each other, and then in the end to survive. So my pick is Jormungand. Takahashi Keitarou, really good series. I do think a lot of overlap with Seinen-esque Yorknew. So I think, but I would even go so far as to say Jormungand is a Seinen that has a lot of shonen elements to it. So a very good, I think a very good match, your Jormungand.
Let's go to ratings then. Now, like I mentioned, I think I view this arc kinder than I did before. Though putting it into context, there's no arc in Hunter x Hunter that I disliked. It's the difference between giving it 80 something and 90 something at this point. Where I land on this arc, I'm going to give it a 93. And you, Enzo?
Well, I see you copied me. I'm giving it a 93. I think it's as with you. To me, there's no arc in Hunter x Hunter I would give less than 90. And indeed, I haven't so far. Yeah, I would say it's really brilliant. It's brilliant in so many ways. It is in many ways kind of like the flowering of his genius, as where Hunter x Hunter really kind of transcends in a way, transcends being what it was. It becomes more than just a battle shonen, and it becomes something much more profound and much deeper. And so for me, uh, maybe the short arcs, like Zoldyck Family, I think I gave that like an 83 or something, but the main arcs are all going to be 90 plus. And I put this right in the same broad category as I would put Greed Island and Heaven's Arena, and I think they're all in the low to mid 90s. So this one is also for me again, maybe the first time we've agreed down to the number, but I would also give it a 93.
Yeah, I don't know if we will agree ever again. So we have to treasure this moment. And like I said, we had to find you had to find something to disagree with and argue on, especially on something that we're on the exact same page about.
I also want to point out that as we do this, volume 38 of the manga came out a couple weeks ago, and obviously was by far the number one selling volume the week it came out, and sold well into six figures even in second week, likely headed for another million volume sales, most likely. And I also want to point out Gon is on the cover, and there is literally there is in the Japanese edition of what's the only edition that's out now of the volume, there is an apology note saying our apologies, but Gon does not actually appear in this volume. So there you go. It is indeed Gon Freaks, but it's the happiest time we've had in Hunter x Hunter for a long time. We have a new volume out doing gangbuster business. We're guaranteed to get at least 10 new chapters starting very soon, with the potential maybe even that we could get more than 10 this time. So yeah, it's not a bad time to be a Hunter x Hunter fan. And honestly, just best wishes, Togashi Sensei. Please, 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 as someone who suffers from, back problems of a serious nature, take care of yourself. Let your assistants do their job. If you hate coloring that much, let somebody else do the coloring, and just stay healthy, take care of yourself. And if you could give us 20 chapters a year, every Hunter x Hunter fan in the world who isn't a downright idiot would be thrilled with that. And I hope that something like that might be possible.
100%. And Gone Freaks might not be in that volume, and he might not be in the next 3 or 4 or 5 volumes. But we shall be continuing covering Hunter x Hunter.
Absolutely.
So we'll be back with Greed Island next time. So we shall see you guys then. Thank you, Enzo, once again, for chatting Hunter x Hunter, and see you next time.
Thank you. See you next time.
Bye bye.